Salutations, my spooky friends. It is I, Dave Makes Noises, the Crypt Keeper of Dungeons and Dragons Storytime on YouTube. Just wanted to take a spooky second to humbly ask you to please tune into our live streams every Wednesday and Sunday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. GMT, and of course, our shiny new podcast, Knowledge with Nolan, airing every Saturday. If you have a weird house rule you'd like to share with us, please do so in the comments below. For all your other stories, please share them with us in our subreddit, r/MrRipper, the thriving hub of Rip Daddy's house. That's all for announcements. Now I ask you, what is the weirdest house rule you've seen in a D&D campaign? Part 2. How about the oddly specific, there's no such thing as chicken armor? Sadly, I don't know the exact details because it was before I joined the group. But it seems the PCs were hired by a bunch of local farmers to protect their lands from a horde of monsters. They managed to fend off the first attack on a local chicken farmer thanks to the farmer in question being rich enough to hire some guards to help our group. Sadly, the farmer himself didn't survive the attack, and the random group of monsters our heroes had to fight included a rust monster, which, while not that much of a threat to their lives, managed to destroy most of their equipment. This was when the biggest problem of the whole scenario became apparent. Those farmlands were basically smack in the middle of nowhere, and there was no way the PCs could travel to anywhere where they might be able to buy some better equipment before the next attack, so they had to improvise. Thankfully, they had a whole farm full of stuff to work with. Now that its owner was dead, their first ideas were pretty normal stuff, using some of the farm implements as improvised weapons, trying to build some shields out of a barn door, stuff like that. Then one of them had a rather creative idea. From what I got, there were disturbingly detailed drawings and a lot of math regarding the density of bones and chicken meat involved. The idea was something like a full suit of armor made of dead chickens. Lots and lots of dead chickens. The DM did allow it back then out of sheer morbid curiosity, but nowadays he says it was a huge mistake and that no one is allowed to talk about it anymore during sessions.
So, why can't I grapple the wizard?
Because he's flying.
But he just hit me. He's right next to me.
He cast a spell on you.
A touch range spell. He hasn't moved since.
So
if he can reach me, I can reach him.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so I grab him.
You hit him? No.
I grab him. A grapple. I've got the feet. I'm stronger than him.
It's not going to work, dude. He can just move away. He's flying.
Flying doesn't stop me grabbing him.
Yeah, but he can move clear.
How?
He just can. It's magic. Fly lets him move. You can't stop that by grabbing him.
Why not?
Because you're a fighter and he's a wizard. He's magic. It's just better.
Is this a rule or?
Look, everyone on the internet says wizards are just better. Basically, the GM ruled that any magic effect trumped any non-magic effect. So levitate would allow a wizard to escape from being trapped under rubble because the levitate was magic and the rubble wasn't. Similarly, a magic missile would stop a charging rhino because it was magical force damage. And the word force is literally in the name. He'd seen a regular controversy in the game about how wizards were overpowered compared to less magical characters and decided to enforce it as a rule in his games. He similarly wouldn't allow cleric or druid magic to overpower wizard spells. Would not call it the weirdest, but it was game-breaking for me at least. He ruled that long rests could only be done in towns, never in the wild, not even with tiny hut, not even with a big base camp, with shelters and food in a safe location. It would be possible if we kind of built a small town or fort with walls, houses, guards, and everything. But the thing is, it would only gimp some classes. A fighter gets everything back on a short rest, a warlock gets all spell slots back on a short rest, and so on. Try playing a bard at 3rd level, you won't get anything back, not even bardic inspiration. I ended up being a crappy ranger standing in the back shooting with a short bow, spending weeks in the wild without any long rests. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind some limitations. I even played games where long rests were hard to get. Like you couldn't just huddle up in a shrubbery and get one, or in a dark cold cave. You needed a decent camp at decently safe location if you wanted a long rest in the wild. I liked that. It did make things more interesting and it made us save our resources. But we could still play our classes. We were not totally gimped. But to totally remove long rests unless in a town or city in a game where the players will spend a lot of time in the wilderness is just stupid, I would say. It totally gimps some classes while hardly affecting others. In one game I played in, we were instructed that the characters needed to make ability checks for practically every task. Therefore, we were rolling to accomplish such monumental and plot-critical things like opening a tavern door, strength check, reaching into our pouches for coins, dex check, having a good night's sleep, con check, calculating whether we could afford a mug of ale, intelligence check, and not making asses of ourselves every time we spoke, worse, of wisdom or charisma. We were using AD&D 2nd edition. We rolled ability checks on a d20, and if you rolled under or tied your ability score, you succeeded, you see? So with a strength of 16, you needed to roll 16 or under on a d20 to open common doors. And for those of you with quick arithmetic skills, you're right. A notably strong individual would fail to open a common door on average 20% of the time. One wonders how NPCs, who should have baseline ability scores of 10 or 11, even manage to get up in the morning, to say nothing of feeding themselves. It was the DM's first time in the big chair. The house rule didn't last the session. After the comedy of errors that ensued as we were trying to begin the adventure, I've had easier times kicking things off in the R&D lab in Paranoia, we quickly corrected the DM's notion that this rule was in any way necessary. HTH. Hand. Languages got remapped. Elven became Latin and so on. Races became different flavors of human. Dwarf became tough human. And Goblin became skeezy little human, and so on. Supernatural racial powers like dark vision went away, arcane casting went away, as did all magic items whose effects couldn't be explained with normal physics. I allowed boots of elven kind, bonus to stealth, but not boots of speed. Huge boost to movement rate. Clerics got reduced spells per day and didn't know when or if their prayers would manifest. Mechanically, it was janky and crude, but it succeeded in creating a world where players could put themselves in the heads of superstitious 12th century explorers whose response to a first-level arcane spell was to hiss witchcraft. Looking back, the better solution would have been to use a different game, RuneQuest or 1st edition D&D, or any of a half a dozen other systems where the low-mid levels aren't so interwoven with powerful magic as 3.5 edition. This year I'm running that same module in 13th Age, a system that is highly magical but for which the magic is not essential, without a single house rule. I don't play a lot of homebrew games, but I came across one that the DM wouldn't let you play a spellcaster that had any kind of healing. He hated when the PCs could be healed in combat, so bards, clerics, paladins, druids, and celestial warlocks were off limits, but so were Aasimar. If it had a healing ability, it was not allowed in his game. To top it off, healing potions were stupid expensive in his game, like 4 times what the player's handbook suggested, but he didn't hand out enough gold for them to be purchased. Long rests rarely happened, and it just kind of made the whole game seem miserable. I sat in for a while, but I had a Celestial Warlock at the time and wasn't allowed to play. The second weirdest one I ran into was the DM that decided detect magic meant everyone could see the magical aura, but didn't tell anyone this ahead of time. Also let a player know that I was casting detect magic even though my character was in a different room at the time. When I asked why, it was because the other player was a wizard. The player didn't have to roll an Arcana check or anything. I wound up leaving that game. This still makes me laugh nearly 30 years later. One of my friends would DM sometimes to switch things up, and I would take over his character. Something involving the group falling from a great height happened. Everyone took 1d6/10, a ton of damage. The DM's character was the only one to die. While I grabbed my Mountain Dew, as you do, planning to play Nintendo the rest of the night, he sputtered and groused about the stupid rule, especially when he came to the part where the damage maxed out. So the next campaign we did was all about his new realistic rules for everything in D&D. You fall 50 feet, you're dead. I don't care. It was so much fun. I don't think we let him DM again after that, lol. However, it did lead to a new style of playing where everything was story-driven and the rules got left in a book bag somewhere. Dice rolls were faked, misses turned to hits, all in the interest of an awesome story and fun. We all wished we had been playing that way from the beginning. Well, this one is actually from the YouTube comments from part 1 of this video. So without further ado, oh boy, here we go. So my buddy and I played with a group for quite some time that had a house rule that during character creation, if you rolled 18 on 3d6 for your stat, you were then allowed to roll a d100 for a chance at a super stat. 50 or under, you just got an 18, but the higher you rolled over 50, the higher the stat would be, up to 22. This rule only came into effect a handful of times and usually didn't screw things up too much. That was until the Super Null happened. So some background. My buddy, up to the events of Super Null, had the worst luck on character creation. Most of the time, he would end up with at or below average charter stats-wise, so whenever possible, he would play an odd race to make his character cooler. On one fated night, we were making characters for a one-off campaign. 3d6, leave them where they lie. The DM, knowing my buddy, let him play a null. He had no way of knowing that Lady Luck was drunk that night and decided that she has been too hard on my buddy. We all sit down to roll stats, and my buddy is ecstatic as he rolls an 18 in strength, then a 15 in dex, then another 18 in con, a 15 in intelligence, 14 in wisdom, and a 16 in charisma. At this point, we are already speechless. This is by far the best he has ever rolled, nay, probably the best anyone in the group has rolled. He then asks,
I can roll for super stats, right?
GM says to go ahead. His first roll is 100, max bonus. Second roll, another freaking 100. So plus his race, he had 24 strength and a 24 con. The group was left dumbfounded. Needless to say, the DM was left at a bit of a loss. I'm not sure what he had planned for that game, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't a super-powered Gnoll barbarian rampaging through every encounter. Hello, my sweet, benevolent little beaver tails of bristling cosmic divinity. Thank you for attuning the tendrils of your intricately interconnected beingness in the direction of this node of the multiverse for a brief while. We are so glad you have joined us today, and even more so that you've opted to stay till the end. If you're a DM or player looking for a group, please check out Rip Daddy's Shiny Group Finder Discord, linked in the description below. Again, please check out our live streams on Wednesdays and Sundays, as well as Knowledge with Nolan on Saturdays. It would mean the world to us to have your support as we try some exciting and fun new concepts with the channel. If you love us and want to help us keep making videos, please take a second to have a look at our merch store or some of our sponsors below. And if you want to share your stories, please join our subreddit r/MrRipper. Please sub for Nat 20s, and please try to learn something new that excites you today. Thank you. I love you. We'll see you tomorrow. Mwah.